Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Seams. I'm Jeremy Angel.
I'm Richard Green.
And I'm Jonathan Lippman. This week I'm chatting with British costume designer Annie Symons. Annie and I go back many years from the very early days of her career and my career at Angels in Shaftesbury Avenue. But what I found particularly interesting about our chat was how she entered the industry and how she became absorbed by osmosis with the whole experience of costume. Already being a very creative person in terms of what she studied and her hobbies as a child, as a student growing up, and the exposure that she had to theatre and the world of dressing up and storytelling is so resonant with so many of the other people that we've interviewed through this series. And it was exciting to reveal all of that with Annie, because she's got a very unique take on how the industry works and how she can best apply her creative talent to the projects that she has been privileged to work on, of which most of them have been with Britain's most innovative and creative directors around: Terence Davies, Derek Jarman, John Maybury, Stephen Poliakoff, Isaac Julian. These are all artists stroke directors, and they all draw out of Annie the essence of what makes her tick, her passion and her enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's a pretty rock and roll career, isn't it, she's had?
Yeah. And she applies that rock and roll language to a lot of the projects that she's been involved with, and has a unique perspective on history and fashion and art and the history of art and what that means in terms of characterization and storytelling.
Well, we hope you enjoy this conversation. We've also been enjoying your feedback. If you have any questions or queries, please email us at podcast@angels.co.uk. You can visit our website, which is www.angelsbehindtheseams.com, or you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. We are /costume podcast. And here is Jonathan's chat with Annie Symons.
So lovely, Annie. I'm thrilled and delighted that we are here together chatting on the Angels podcast Behind the Seams.
Quite right too.
And it's a true pleasure, actually, because I have to tell our audience that I have watched and digested your process over many, many years. And from the early days back in Shaftesbury Avenue, Angels Shaftesbury Avenue.
Oh.
And I've always been intrigued by how collaborative and kind and intense your work process is, because I've seen how your teams respond to your artistic endeavors. And I would say that and I would say that your work delivers in terms of its artistic spirit and energy. And the reason why I made that little statement is because I'd love to know whether that's something that you have always had an ability to do.
I think I'm governed by a need to be listened to, and I think fundamentally being a designer, as a costume designer, maybe other designers, I don't know, is quite a lonely process. And if you can garner support and loyalty from the team around you, I mean, it's not intentional with me. I think I just have a kind of process where I'm sort of very enthusiastic about what I think, and hopefully that permeates.
Oh, it does. I've witnessed it. But when you were a youngster, then growing up, and getting involved in activities, youth activities, even childhood activities, were you a team leader then?
Now this is going to sound completely idiotic, but I think I was iconoclastic in that I was usually on my own. I spent a lot of my childhood on my own, and I spent the rest of the time trying to seek out people to hang out with, not for their approval, but just so I didn't feel quite as bonkers, I don't think. But having said that, I'm quite happy on my own in a funny kind of way. So, like most of us, I had quite an unusual childhood. I moved a lot.
Mm.
But, I think I grew up in the back of a car with a plant in my ear. And we didn't live together really as a family till I was about 9. So I had a very kind of, I had great resources. I mean, I had great people around me. I was very loved and very sort of, I had extraordinary adults in my life, but I was also, I think, lucky enough to have had created my own sort of internal landscape, which has stood me well. And so I think the funny thing is having other people around me it always feels so transitory to me. You just think, oh, you might as well make the most of it because it's all going to change, which it certainly does in the film industry.
Well, yeah, in the true spirit of the entertainment industry, that you form a family with, it becomes like a capsule of what your life is at that moment, which is transient, and that probably goes back and reflects back to your upbringing, and as you just described, and you sort of make your family where you are.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it's interesting because, I don't think it's irrelevant. I have 3 children that I brought up on my own, and, it hasn't been easy for them. But I think what I've expected from them is what I had in myself, and that's not necessarily true. And that's a sort of internal dialogue that is, can sustain you through anything, actually.
Did you ever express that the way that you realized you were bringing them up was partly the way that you were brought up?
No, it's. I mean, honestly, it just takes a lot to understand why people do what they do, and
The reason why I'm if you like broaching this aspect of the life that you lead as a designer is because we have an audience who are listening and aware of how complex this industry is, and how and what the environments are that we work within in terms of the pressure, and also that very, very sensitive issue of life-work balance, and how you try and maintain a life that one would consider as normal, whatever normal is, and what you're hoping to attain through artistic endeavor. And as I've explained to you when we were chatting about this whole interview process, that it's essentially a series of questions that we structured right at the very beginning, and it's the same questions that we ask every practitioner. The different questions for supervisors than to designers and makers to textile designers, but it's the same questions, and everyone has their own take and their own view of how their industry and how their practice is formed. And that's what makes, in my opinion, that's what makes this such a fascinating podcast to be involved with. And I suppose partly why I'm talking about all of this, as well as the live-work balance, is that out of all of the transients in terms of your childhood, where did the creativity come in? What was that light bulb moment?
I don't know. It was survival. I mean, to me, having an inner landscape or a visual landscape that totally belonged to me is survival.
And was that through reading books or watching movies or listening to music, or
Well,
all of them?
all of the above. But, I'm of a generation where my mum would leave me in the library for half a day where she'd go shopping, or, I'd get dropped off at the Saturday morning pictures. That was your world. And I read everything I could lay my hands on from a very early age till, oh God, I still do. I'm sick to death of the bloody fucking screens, actually. I don't really want to watch anything else.
Give me a piece of paper.
Well, it's not just that. It's a different experience. You know, you can read someone's words and you can internalize them. Whereas when you watch a kind of film or something on screen, that's what you have is you have an experience that you kind of enter into. And what I desperately want to do is go back into my own thought process. So reading, I mean, this whole lockdown thing has been extraordinary. I've read loads and it's been really liberating. I've actually felt as fresh as I did, I don't know, decades ago, intellectually, mentally, which is fantastic.
Is it reading that takes you into another dimension in terms of fantasy, or is it learning about, is it human psychology? What drives you?
Well, I mean, I am visually driven as well as ideas driven, of course. Going back to the light bulb moment, I mean, my grandmother was an extraordinary, my maternal grandmother was an extraordinarily elegant woman. She, you know, I used to sit in her bed in Edinburgh and read her Vogues on this kind of pink sateen eiderdown. And my mum made all my clothes. My mother was a beautiful dressmaker, actually, and quite eccentric. When I think about what I wore and how strange it must have looked in the east coast of Scotland in the 1960s. You know, not that I appreciated it then because I just wanted stuff out the catalogues like all my other friends, you know. But I was surrounded by women who had a kind of, they had their own identity. I mean, for whatever reason, I don't know what the light bulb moment was. It was a kind of natural progression, I say, because I did fine art at art school. I didn't do design. I didn't do fashion or costume design. And in fact, I worked in fashion and costume. But I think it was just because, you know, making clothes and expressing ideas through clothes was second nature. It was also a survival mechanism because that's how I could earn money.
Yeah. And were you aware at that point that you could realize artistry through designing clothing in context and narrative, whether it's theatre, film, or...
No, I mean, what I've always been interested in is subtext, and to this day, if I can't find a way into a script that sort of gives me my own narrative, shall we say, it doesn't really interest me. I mean, having said that, you can find God in anything, if you know what I mean. You can, even the worst scripts, there's salvation in it. And I've had to do some pretty terrible stuff to survive because I'm a mother of 3 children on my own, you know. I mean, you know, that's what I'm not joking about survival. A lot of the choices I've made are about, like, I've got no money. What's happening next? I'll do that. Which is a bit of a shame in a way, because I think possibly, no, it's not a shame. You know, I live the duality of my existence is about having children who I deeply, deeply care about, and you know, are a primary force. But the creativity and the need to express yourself as well as earn the money is equally as strong. So, I mean, you know, that can lead to quite severe conflict at times, internal conflict.
You and I are of a similar generation. Well, we're the same generation, but we didn't have similar upbringing. But I know that you were, luckily enough, you were able to be involved with the National Youth Theatre, and yes. I know that was a very important point in terms of your coming away from, you know, your family life and into an environment where you were sort of like, not many people out there will remember this, but the double deckers, or kind of
come on board, double deckers.
And then if anyone needs to know more about that, they can YouTube something. I'm sure it will be there. But essentially, that forming that gang, that camaraderie of like-minded individuals living in London, in, you know, which is still the case. You know, they have a membership that comes down to London to do a summer season, and I'm a very, very keen supporter of theirs and have been for many years.
And they've also got regional branches now, which is...
That's right.
It means, you know, people who don't have the kind of means don't have to come down and live in They can do it in Newcastle, or Leeds, or Bristol, or Liverpool. I don't know, Manchester even, I think.
Yeah, they have. They basically cover every city, and the Arts Council is very supportive of, their remit. That is, well, it's exactly what their title is, and they have, if you like, thrown out the. It was Michael Croft, wasn't it?
Yeah, Michael Croft,
Michael Croft.
the most
And,
imitated man on earth.
yeah, and then Ed Wilson,
Yeah,
and now Paul Roseby, and they are inordinately inspirational, not just to backstage members, but also to performers. Whether it's Helen Mirren or Matt Lucas, who we've got in an interview coming up, and it's remarkable what an organisation like that can do to form young adults.
Well, yeah, as an experience. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I was lucky enough to have discovered the theatre when I was quite young in Exeter, where I was a teenager. Stumbled into I think we were on a school trip, and I went into the wardrobe and met Maria Liljefoss, who was the head of wardrobe, and she was so charismatic, and the sort of
Knowledgeable
chemistry of carbon tetrachloride, Gauloises, frags, cheap washing powder and coffee, and this intensity of making stuff to get the camaraderie. It was really intoxicating. And yeah, so I went off to do the National Youth Theatre one summer. I think I must have been about, I don't know, I think I had my 16th birthday there. God knows what my mother was thinking of, sending me off to London on my own.
Did you know about them through school or through the Northcott?
No, I belonged to this thing called the Exeter Northcott Youth Theatre, which was a right laugh. And I had this, I was in love with this boy called Phil Pentecost. And extraordinary. He was extraordinary, actually. He went up to do the National Youth. His mother was a dancer, and she used to take classes at the Exeter Northcott Youth Theatre, Barbara Pentecost. And he went up to do lighting as a technician. And he said, "Oh God, you really ought to go. It's really good, blah 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 blah." So the next year I applied and got in wardrobe, in costume, and it was absolutely mind blowing. I kind of went up from Devon in a hippie dress and came back a punk. It was so seismic, the experience, and I lost my virginity, which was quite high time too. Probably before you should have, but I mean, that's what we did in those days. But it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, and to be immersed in, an ensemble company of very young, very excited, but very well led people. We were, I won't say we were looked after, but we were led well. And I think, we were lucky because we had so much fun, and, it didn't really matter. We were just there for the experience. And of course I went back to Devon after that, and it's like, oh God, I can't stay here. And I was on the milk train up to London every weekend until I finally got to art school at Hornsey in 1979. Yeah, no, I mean, I think theatre is a very, very important experience, and I'm always interested when I get CVs, when I see people have done theatre, because to me, they understand the importance of collaboration and hard work and the esprit de corps, and we do have in film, but to be honest, I see less and less of it. I don't, as things become more corporate and more sort of regimented.
Well, it's a more dislocated process because of the nature of casting, because of the nature of scheduling, because of budgets.
Also, the expectations of different generations. I mean, when I was a kid, we had to kind of learn it all ourselves. We had to figure it out. And now you get a bloody degree in it, and they still don't know what they're doing. And I find a weird sense of, you get these incredibly articulate, on paper, on Instagram, on whatever media platform, confident people who are qualified by a degree, and yet they have no sense of humility. They have no sense of.
Well, it's an entitlement.
It is an entitlement. I mean, it sounds atrocious, but I just think, why don't you respect what older people know and what older people have done, and what you can't just click Instagram and think you understand that, because you can replicate that, you can reappropriate that. You can't have lived that. And I don't honestly, I don't know whether they're as confident as they appear to be. I think probably not.
But it doesn't matter. It's the fact that they have, in their minds, reached a point where they can, whether it's through what they're told or whether it's through their own process of education, they've reached a point where they can enter into an industry that actually has more respect for people that have gone through the ranks. And a lot of people that come in at that graduate level need to then practically take a step back and immerse themselves in exactly what you've just been describing. Because it's a cliche, but the smell of the grease paint.
Well, it's experiential, isn't it? It's not academic, and it's not. I mean, also, I think what I find really difficult about education is it is a business, and it won't tell people that they're crap at things. I grew up in a time where we literally had to we took responsibility for ourselves. And this is what I find the difference is, a lot of young people, they come in and they kind of don't take responsibility for themselves, because there's this sort of nannying education system that won't fail people, because if they fail people, they'll get sued. Yeah. And some people just aren't fucking good enough, end off. They're not good enough. They're not going to cut it. They don't have the balls, and they don't have the spirit, and they don't have the talent. And I think a lot of these colleges are misrepresenting the world they're going into. And also, while we're on the subject, just the high ratio of designer graduates that are coming out compared to the jobs that are available, and the other roles within costume that aren't being accessed.
Well, we've discussed that. You and I have discussed that in terms of the roles of
where
supervision.
Are the supervisors? Where are the coordinators? Where are these people who are vital and they're really good jobs?
Yes.
And you will always be employed. There are none around, and it's a real issue at the moment. It's a huge issue, because as designers we can't do the jobs because we don't have our teams. Because everybody wants to be a bloody designer, and frankly, you get to be a designer when, well, I don't know. I mean, it's like anything corporate. I mean, they'll be looking for fresh blood and young people who can tolerate a system that I find, frankly, creatively really destructive a lot of the time. I mean, I'm ballsy enough and possibly experienced enough. And
well, you can navigate your way through it. But the only reason why you can push back and navigate is because, in my opinion, and this is where I started the conversation, is that I believe that you fully understand every aspect of your department, and because of your approach, and because of where you started, and because of how you have acquired your experience, whether it was your doing the work for the BFI, whether it was the work that you did for Derek Jarman, whether you have had that collaborative experience that actually in a lot of ways doesn't exist anymore. And that's where the industry has shifted. And where you entered the industry and where it is now, you almost wouldn't recognize it, because
it wasn't an industry. What it was when I first arrived in London, it was a lot of posh white boys who liked pretty girls, and then there were the homosexuals, and then there were the marginal others. And because for whatever reason, maybe I was too bolshy, not pretty enough, not posh enough. I luckily, and thank God, I gravitated wasn't and accepted by gay filmmakers, Black and Asian filmmakers, Sankofa, the Black and Asian Film Collective, you know, the BFI, who were great supporters of alternative narrative.
So once you had done your work in that arena, did you then step into like BBC Films and Screen 4 and when they were emerging?
I don't know. So it was a kind of muddy waters. I mean, I worked in fashion as well as pop promos and
I didn't know that. Who did you work for?
fashion.
Fashion, yeah.
Well, I had my own label called Manifest, and I went to Italy to design only for a season because I wasn't trained. You know.
Wow.
They were literally scooping people off the street, and I was shopping for a pop promo for Nick Roeg, actually, for what's his name, John Waters, and I was in this boutique in St Christopher's Place, and and I was buying something, and the guy said, "Oh, I really like Italian guy. I really like your top. Where's he from?" So that was xenophobic. It's a crap Italian accent, whatever it is.
It is pretty crap.
It's pretty crap. And sorry, Marco, I'm sorry. And I said, "Oh, I made it." And he said, "I don't believe you." So because I was young and beautiful, of course, I took it off and threw it at him shamelessly. And there was my label, Manifest. And he said, "Would you like to go and design in Italy?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I would." I was 24. And he said, and he rang me. And honestly, the next week I was on a plane to Bologna. And I worked in this factory trying to produce Vendemode, which is Italian for, you know, pret-a-porter. And we produced a line, but it didn't sell. It wasn't. I didn't really know and they didn't know what. To be honest, they didn't know what they were doing. But what they were doing was trying to cash in on that whole
London, yeah,
the London thing.
Hyper, and the early Vivienne Westwood.
Yeah. Body map and blah blah blah. But I mean, I was making stuff, and Boy George was wearing it. Duran Duran were wearing it, you know, and it was getting quite a lot of press. But I mean, in that respect, I was a fashion designer. But in terms of productivity, I was still selling on in markets.
Well, again, the industry during that time, because I entered the industry in the early 80s, and one of the first permission to express were all the pop videos that were taking place, whether it was Culture Club, when it was Wham, and it was seen as the most vital form of medium. And alongside commercials,
there was money. You know, people could do what they liked. It was a playground, and not only that, none of us had to pay rent. I mean, I lived in squats till I was 28, so you know, we didn't have that kind of sense of accountability. In a sense, we were playing, but we worked bloody hard. You know, I don't think we were mucking about. We were working at our craft. We were working at.
Well, London was a completely different environment to live in terms of what was expected of one, and it was so much cheaper to exist and cheaper to get around. So if you lived in Bow or Stoke Newington, it was, you know, you had buses and transport all day. And
I also think things took longer. We didn't. You know, we didn't have mobile phones. Pagers didn't arrive until the mid to late 80s. You know what I mean? So
was the first mobile phone you got given to you by a production company?
No, I bought it. I think it was a Nokia 1230.
Oh, not one of those big blocks.
No, but I mean, from art school, I went from a squat in Bloomsbury. Georgian House in Bloomsbury, and I joined in with a building in Curtain Road in Shoreditch, which was squalid. It was bloody freezing, and Assorted Images were on the top floor, and they designed record sleeves, and so they had all the pop stars coming in. And then on the middle floor there was me, Judy Blame, Andy the furniture maker, Penny Beard, who did printing, La Paz, who did. Annie La Paz and Lucy Morahan did sets for pop promos, and Teresa the Rubber Girl, who was a bit odd. But anyway, and then on the lower ground floor, there was a recording studio. So it was like Andy Warhol's factory, the sort of Malcolm Garrett.
Cummings and the Going.
Yeah. And, we'd make stuff for them and then work on their pop promos and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And
is that where you came across John Maybury and Derek and Bailey and?
How did I meet? No, I met. I knew Judy Blaine from Exeter, because he was Chris Barnes then, and he was part of that scene, I suppose. But it wasn't. I mean, I was doing graduation films at the National Film and Television School, because you couldn't learn to be a costume designer in those days. You had to kind of do it for film. You could do it in theatre, for theatre in
places like Wimbledon.
But I was attaching myself to graduation films at the National Film and Television School, and I met someone called Kath Pater-Lanzutsky, who was a production designer, and she said to me one day, "Oh, my friend Sandy's looking for an assistant for a film." I said, "Oh, all right, I'll meet her." And I went down to this house, in this gothic horror house in Hackney, and Sandy Powell opened the door, and she had like red dripping off the ends of her hand. She'd just been chopping up some beetroot, and I thought she'd murdered someone. But we just kind of hit it off immediately, and I became her assistant on Caravaggio, which is where I met Derek Jarman, to work with. Although I had met him at art school, he'd come up to give a lecture, and I was really, I'd just seen The Tempest, and I was overwhelmed with his kind of kindness and his generosity and his enthusiasm. I thought he was so cool, but he was so encouraging. So I met Sandy, we got on, and I had this studio in Curtin Road, this costume making studio. So we started off Caravaggio there, and then moved onto Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf, where the studios were, and we continued making there. So that's where I met Derek, through that, and all the other extraordinary creative, Kerith Wynne Evans, probably John Maybury. Actually, I'm not sure how I met John Maybury. I used to share a flat with Alan MacDonald, who was John Maybury's best friend, who tragically died a few years ago.
Well, Kerith's a wonderful artist.
He is.
And then in that house that Sandy lived in was Nigel Lowry, and
oh, that's right.
There was a whole little artistic central
squalor. It was squalor. All I can say. It was squalid. And I lived around the corner on the top floor of a tower block, which was extraordinary. Penthouse now. Couldn't get it for less than 2 million. But
when you reflect back, do you think there was a plan?
No.
The reason why I'm asking you that is because, again, just touching back on that graduate entry level where it's drummed into students going through a costume design degree that you have to have a target, you have to set yourself a goal, and which is partly the reason why these students come out with such roaring ambition without proper focus. And so I ask you the question I just asked you in context to that, is that you're being industrial, you're working, you're immersed in a world, you're creating, but yet you had no plan.
No, I think what we were driven by was experience. And I mean, someone like Derek was so charismatic, as was John Maybury and Sandy. We sort of found each other. We made our own art school, in a sense. To anybody, is just go for the experience. It's like, don't just expect the unexpected, and if a door opens, walk through it.
Be a bit freer about it.
Yeah, be free about it, because who the hell knows what's going to happen. I mean, the whole industry could dry up. I mean, who knows? We've had one recession. That's what I find interesting at the moment. There's a whole battery of young people who have the confidence to demand all these things within the industry, and yet they have no idea what it's like for that. Well, maybe they do now after COVID. Maybe that's it. Maybe this is their writer's strike. I don't know. It's like things can change at any minute. Don't trust anything. You have to have internal resources. I think the thing is, when we were kids, our world, and London and Soho and all those sort of demi worlds were attracting people who didn't fit in anywhere else. And now what I'm finding is there's quite a lot of people who are coming. Well, maybe there needs to be people who are literally factory floor workers in a sense. But maybe the nature of what we do in sort of big television requires that level of fodder. It's a rude thing to say, but there isn't that much room in the industry for free thinking anymore. And when I was growing up, when I met Sandy, and actually it wasn't until I met Sandy that I actually understood that it was okay to think that thinking creatively was bona fide, because she always had that extraordinary confidence.
Permissible.
Yeah, well, she had confidence in herself.
Yeah, no, and still
Yeah,
does, and it amazingly sort of experience. Just moving along in the context of your career, one of the observations that I have made about your work is that a lot of it is imbued in creative narrative, in the sense that you haven't worked on a lot of projects that have involved actual reenactment of real people. Love is the Devil is a notable example of a real person, and you're about to do a project about Wilfred Owen, aren't you?
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you've artistically interpreted Dickens and novels and historical characters, but but a lot of realms of fantasy, and that process is so complex and relies on huge resources in terms of support and makers and workrooms, and also working in foreign countries, Budapest and Prague and South Africa and
wherever. Yeah.
Given the constraints, given the fact that you've got the kids, and the decisions that you've made based on economic need, but also artistic needs. You've got an agent, and you weigh up the pros and the cons, and presumably you make a decision based on all those factors. Is there a project that has most excited you?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think Love is the Devil was one of the most exciting things, because working with John Maybury and Alan MacDonald in a way that was, I mean, you cited it as the one had real people in it, but those people weren't, they were real in one form, but in the film they're real in another form. And, we had very kind of interesting aesthetic limitations that were liberating. I don't know how else to put it. We had no money, and we had a fantastic script and a fantastic ensemble of minds. Johnny Matheson shot it. John Maybury wrote it and directed it. Alan MacDonald designed it. Daniel
Craig film, Derek Jacobi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Tilda. I mean, the cast were phenomenal, but I think, visually, I think what it was it was just, I don't know, it was just very, it was like work, it was like doing something at art school. It felt very normal to me to work in that way, and fulfilling and exciting.
Was that a BFI film?
Yeah, it was.
And do you remember who your supervisor was on that film?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I had one. I don't think I knew what they were then. You see, that's the thing. We were so unstructured. It's like, Sandy. I was Sandy's assistant, and I said, I must have been the worst assistant in the world. I didn't know what I was doing. She didn't know what she was doing. None of us knew what we were doing. We were just kind of figuring it out. But somehow the intention and the sort of dynamic was there. So we just figured it out. I can't I don't think I had a supervisor.
But tell me, if you, that's fine, the figuring it out, and everyone gives everyone a little bit of leeway. But what would happen if you came across a prickly performer who wasn't prepared to indulge you figuring it out? What happened to how did you approach that?
I think then people were much a bit more relaxed, really. I mean, no, there weren't any. I mean, Daniel Craig wasn't Bond then. You know, it was like, well, the only thing he didn't like was the hand painted suit I did for him. I got him a suit from a charity shop and painted stripes on it with emulsion paint to give it a kind of grotesque, like a pinstripe suit, but it was grotesque. So he was trying to fit in with a world that he didn't belong to. Duh. He hated that, and I just said, we have to wear it. You know, you're going to be shot in a dirty mirror anyway. Nobody's going to. But I mean, you know, we weren't dealing with sort of agents and egos. It was a collaborative thing. Yeah, it really was. I mean, I dread the crap that arrives before artists these days. You think, oh God, what have we got coming through the door? And 9 times out of 10, everybody's fine. You know, they just want to work in the process. But I mean, it is complicated because I mean, quite a lot of actors are aware of their image beyond the piece that you're doing, and they sort of, you know, that comes, well, it comes with their agents. It doesn't always come with them. So I wouldn't wear that, and you think, well, why not? And then you find out because they wore it in their last thing, and you just think, oh, fuck off. You know, it's so irrelevant. It's not about, you know, it's not about branding you, but of course it's about branding. I mean, I think that's the trouble. The world we're working in, unless you're lucky enough to work in a very, you know, with great independent thinking producers, which I have done. I have to say, I've worked with great people, even in these massive multi-produced things. There's been great people in there. There's always great people in there.
Well, that's what keeps you going.
It's about branding a lot of the time. I'm not interested in fucking being a brand monitor. You know, if you can't deal with my maverick thinking, you're probably not the right person for the job, basically.
There is that aspect to the work, and obviously the more expansive the project, in that, well, Dracula being an example, was it Da Vinci?
Da Vinci's Demons was the first American thing I did after BBC stuff. Because, I mean, you know, I courted that. I wanted to know what that was like. I wanted to know what it was like to work with studios. And, you know, remuneratively, it made a difference. But, you know, hanging on to that sense of authorship was hard. And, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing that destroys you, is if you feel so much decision-making seems to happen at a corporate level, and I will always push back against that. But I think quite often what they're looking for is people who just shop for them. And that's hard. That is hard, because as a designer, you have to have your narrative, you have to have your storyline, you have to have, you know, you're designing the whole film. You're not shopping for individuals. You're
seeing the bigger picture.
You do, and, you know, which is why, you know, you always have to find the person in that team who speaks the same language as, you know, who you can have the dialogue with.
And do you get that? Apart from a showrunner, do you get that from your team? Would you say that it's important that your costume designer has the same aesthetic, even though their role within the department is completely different? It's aligned to what you're trying to do in the sense that they have to support you.
Yeah, they do have to support you, and if they don't understand that, it's very tricky, you know, because it is a difficult job, and if you don't have the back of your team, you're screwed. You are screwed, and it's very lonely and challenging if somebody's either deliberately undermining that or doesn't have the wit or the intelligence to understand that they're undermining that.
Yeah.
And I've come across quite a lot of people who've just made me want to curl up and die, and within my own team, and that's horrible. That's horrible, because one needs to be protected within that. And I think they just look at you as somebody who's like, it's a game of chess. They're going to knock you out. They're going to be the queen. And it's not about that. Well, it is. Somebody has to be the bloody queen.
But that's, again, back to where I started, is that I'm surprised to hear that, because I've always seen you as being incredibly inclusive. And as I said, embracing the whole product.
Well, up to a point. I mean, I always thought Derek was interesting in that respect, and that he caught this dialogue, and yet ultimately it was his decision. And I think a lot of what I do is court dialogue, so I can hear voices that aren't just my own banging in my head. But the creative process is about the exchange you have with a maker, with a dyer, with where that could go, where you don't have time to think it through. They can bring stuff to the table, and if they're clever, if they're creative, if they've got their own thing going, they can
contribute, can't they?
Well, contribute.
And would you say that in looking over reflecting on your career, an environment like Angels can kind of push that creativity forward in terms of what using a supply house? And I don't just mean Angels, I mean the resource of existing clothing, because I know so much of what you do is fantasy led. It's fictitious narrative, which demands an aspect of creativity that is more than just dealing with biographical drama.
Well, I mean, the thing is, nothing has any sense unless you root it in something that's humanly recognizable. And I think, the sort of the big joy, and the particular joy of Angels, I might say, is that you can wander around there and be fed with ideas and shapes and play. I mean, I've always found it easy to play and experiment at Angels.
Well, that's my first memory of you, actually, is probably Bargee on the Beach, and the playing. The sort of the formation of things that you would bring in from shops, things that you would find within the stock, the ethnic aspect, the dealing with the production on a very limited scale, which that was, with almost like a passion project, wasn't it, in terms of the director and the cast, and the again, exactly what you've just been saying about the work with Derek and John Maybury, that you were a family.
Yeah.
And I remember you on the floor at Shaftesbury Avenue, kind of 7:00 at night on a Thursday or Friday or something, always in the summer, because that's when the industry's at its busiest. And just being very drawn in to your your artistic world.
I think it, again, it's a sort of survival, isn't it? You sort of you have to find a.
Well, you're building up relationships. You're building up a relationship to the point where now you can come across the threshold, and you can play. You are given that liberty, and there's it's a relaxed relationship, because you know how to get the best out of a resource, a facility like Angels, and Angels will get hires, Angels will get business, won't they? In the same way that you may use other houses and have the same relationships, whether it's Roger Burton or Carlo Manzi or Academy. It is symbiotic, but it also comes with years of history.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I remember when I was doing I can't mention the name, but we were doing a pilot for something that didn't actually go, which was based in no time at all. And I remember Tim Angel coming up to me and saying, "How on earth do you start if you don't know where it's based?" And I just thought, I don't really know. I don't know how I start. You just have to find a motif, find something that triggers a train of thought. And
do you do that through drawing, sketching, or is it pictures and reference and Google books?
there's no single route in. I don't have an identifiable process. To be honest, I think every time I start a job, I don't know what the fucking hell I'm doing, and it feels like you're mad, and you're just trying to find sense in a load of nonsense.
Does that happen to you in a sense of panic, and then it lifts, and then you've got a little bit of clarity?
I don't know. It's it's a complex job. I mean, half the time you're sort of involved in the nitty gritty of trying to put your whole team together in the battle with the budget, and so the sort of on a subconscious level you're working out the aesthetics. And I need to look at imagery. I definitely need to go to art galleries, and I need to look at cinema, and I need to, and if it's period, I do like to read around it. I like to know this socio-economic background stuff, and I like to know the truth of.
Sure.
It's not just about pretty clothes.
Well, how do you get under the skin of a character if you haven't got, and then ultimately working with the performer if you haven't got a lot of the answers. You don't need to have all of them, but you need to be able to present a coherent case for what you're aiming at.
Yeah, I think for me, the intellectual pursuit of truth within design is as important.
Absolutely, yeah. Tell me, Annie, because I know you're insatiably curious, and I think that's why you've got a lot of friends, and that's why you've got a lot of friends who you've had for a long time. And is there a single piece of advice that you'd offer to somebody that wanted to be a costume designer out of everything that we've been discussing?
Well, I think you just put your finger on it. It's about having almost like a childlike curiosity, a bewilderment about whatever it is you're going into. Just like try and understand whatever the world is, to try and figure it out, to try and make sense of it. And take opportunities and be curious and be open. I mean, it's very difficult because I think what's increasingly obvious is the people who can afford to do that are the people who could always afford to do that. And, that they're not always the best. They don't always have the best stories. It's like the kids who don't have the support of the socio-economic backgrounds to get them into art school in the first place, or whose parents are happy for them to go into a completely non-aspirational career. I mean, you have to be driven. You have to be driven by for design. I'm not talking about the sort of, frankly, will never be designers, but work within the costume department, and that's fine. There's camaraderie there. There's money to be made. There's fun. There's travel. There's a lot of things that you can get out of working on big productions. But I think if you want to be a designer, you have to have something inside you that I wouldn't know how to describe. It's different for all of us. It's completely different for me.
Of course it is, but I also think it's our responsibilities as designers to be able to see that characteristic in somebody.
Yes, and you can spot it. You can,
Yeah,
and
it's the chemistry of making sure that when you spot it, you're working on the right project in order to realize it to its best capability. Well, Annie, that was a very revealing insight into your working life and how you think about things and process thoughts through. And I'm really appreciative of you having the time to spend with us talking about it. I'm very happy it's all worked out.
Oh well, it's always nice talking to you. I think we've known each other so long.
I know I think it's almost 40 years.
Oh, shut up.
No, it is about 37, 38 years.
Oh my god.
I know.
Anyway, I still feel like the 23-year-old that walked into Angels for the first time. So there you go. That's the thing to
do you remember when that was?
It must have been. It might have been Caravaggio. When we came in with Derek and we looked at all the cardinals, but angels. Ooh,
Shaftesbury Avenue.
yeah. I mean, that was a treasure trove. That was like heaven. That was like digging around in my granny's, cupboard, finding sparkly things, which I think have all been stolen by those bloody fashion stylists. I'm pretty sure. I don't know where they are.
Yeah, and what's been given back in return is there samples from the.
Oh well, as long as there's a quid pro quo at some level,
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Well, look, Annie, lovely. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed that chat.
Yeah. See you soon. Very soon. Tomorrow, in fact.
Oh yes, bright and early.
Super.
That was Jonathan's chat with Annie. Richard, I have your game of consequence from our last interview. Alex Forden worked on Young Victoria with Sandy Powell, and Annie started with, I'm going to get it wrong, Caravaggio with Sandy Powell. Caravaggio, with Sandy Powell. So there's your link.
Excellent. Well, there we are. There's our link. Hooray! I think we should play Happy Families. I'd like
Mr. Green,
Mr. Frock, the costumier, or Mrs. Frock, or whatever.
There were some things that Annie said that I found fascinating. I don't look at things the way she does, and it was interesting to hear them. I mean, the one that stuck with me...
Well, she has a unique voice.
She does, and the one that stuck with me really much was the comment she made about reading, and she went and comparing it to film and TV, the fact that when you read a book, you internalize it and you create the imagery in your own mind. But when you go to see a film or at the TV, it's an experience. And I just thought that was a fantastic view of looking. That's why she prefers the reading and stuff, because she gets to internalize it and create the imagery in her own mind, rather than when at film and TV where you're being told all the details and what they all look like. And I thought she vocalized that so well.
Yeah, well, I suppose this is why people complain bitterly, don't they? They read a book and it's their favourite book and they imagine the characters, and then they go and watch the film version or the TV version of it, and it looks nothing like the way they've imagined it. And I suppose in Annie's case, she's imagining it and then actually being able to realise it in 3D, as it were.
Yeah.
Well, and albeit with the constraints of collaboration. Yeah. And what's also interesting about that theory is essentially the process, whether you're reading or watching a TV film, are utterly subjective. And the fact that so much of our industry depends on critique and review and comment. And it's I think that's one of the uglier aspects of our industry, that it's very awards driven, and we're all at the mercy of somebody saying whether our work is good or bad without knowing the details of the process in which we all have to kind of strive to achieve.
I mean, that's a really good example, because I know we all know of productions and TV series that once they come out, there's tons of comments made online, or people as well. And at times it's wrong, but it's the snap judgment that they think this is what they think the period should look like. And the actual designer and the look is completely correct and everything's right, but it just wasn't what they imagined, and they disagree with it. And you're right. It is really subjective, and the award driven with it is quite a negative with our industry, which it doesn't get discussed quite a lot when reviews are wrong, which I suppose goes back into the whole thing of Richard can get on his hobby horse about accuracy and detail. But it's a really good point to make, which I don't think a lot of people think about.
No, and people from the outside have no idea of the time constraints, the budget constraints. The fact that somebody said, "Well, what was that example the other day where somebody wanted a uniform that was actually green, and then they announced they were going to do it on a green screen, and suddenly it's like, okay, that's not going to work, is it?" So there are all sorts of reasons why things may happen, which of course aren't ever explained. I always think there should be some captions, that go up and say, "We only had a day to get this costume pulled from the time the actor was cast." Or
I think it's beholden on artists to be enigmatic, because I think too much information also spoils the story, spoils the message. One shouldn't always need to explain oneself.
Yeah,
Mm.
if you show how the trick's done, then you've spoiled the magic of the trick.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
But of course, part of the reason we're doing these is to kind of get behind the scenes and actually explain, debunk some of the myth about how things are done. You know, it is inherently hard work. It is a grinding out that sort of, and you know this more than I do, Jonathan, but grinding out this creative process and finding that balance between keeping the director and the actor and your integrity. You know, all of those things are sheer hard slog.
They are, and for the most part, that's a very important message contribution that I think all of our interviewees have made very clear throughout this process.
Yeah.
But what you don't want to do is respond to what we were just talking about in terms of the subjective reaction to you don't want to get caught up in having to justify dotting the I's and crossing the T's in terms of the detail that one has to go through in order to push an idea or a concept forward.
And then the other thing, which is the whole reality, which came out in Nat's interview as well, is you can spend all this time doing something, making the accuracy, the detail, researching it, and you see it for all of 0.5 of a second on screen, but you spent 2 weeks doing it. But you get reward from that, but people obviously don't see it and can't give you the reward. It's a personal satisfaction, but it's more about, as long as you were happy with it, I suppose, more than the exterior or the external views.
Jonathan, have you had to scrap concepts and go in different directions?
No, not overall concepts, but certainly conversations that take place with performers,
right,
in terms of how they see themselves and how I see their character,
okay,
and just and navigating a way through that and finding a result that works for everybody.
Yeah,
And that's time consuming and fascinating and complex.
okay. So simplistically, if you found, say, a sleeveless dress for an actress, and the actress then turns around and says, "Well, I hate my upper arms, and I don't ever want those on show," then you'd have to modify that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation, and it's about, but you, before you actually even presented a sleeveless dress, you would know that.
Okay.
It would be beholden on you as a member of the creative team to have sort of prepared for that point. And before that effort of searching for the sleeveless dress is put down on paper or found as an item, you would have had that conversation and established that your actor is not happy with their whatever.
Right. Okay.
And factor that into the process.
Okay.
The other thing which I found, which you got from that interview with Annie, which I thought was lovely, was the way she described the intoxicating smell of the theatre when she went there the first time, the coffee granules, the cheap washing powder, and all of that. And again, it's another thing you don't often think about, of certain smells associated with what we do at times.
What's the lyric to that? The smell of the grease
paint. The roar of the grease paint and the smell of the crowd is actually, yeah, the original. Yeah, they flipped it. Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, the smell of that preservative they use in equipment and stuff is like, oh God, yes, this is how I've earned my money, how I've earned my living.
It was a really interesting chat, Jonathan. I think you got a lot out of Annie, and I think, like all the other people that we've interviewed, she's got a unique vision with when she works, and she has a very interesting viewpoint. A lot of things she said are very true and need to be heard at times.
Yeah, and forcefully expressed.
Yes. The next interview we're going to be releasing is my interview with Ian Fulcher. Ian is another ex-member of staff who is and now a designer, but he also comes from that crew that we had at one point in time at Angels. He was there with Nat, he was there with Bart, he was there with quite a lot of the people who are coming through at quite a senior level now, and as designers, as supervisors, as assistants, and all of that. And it was a lovely chat with Ian from the sunny hills of Italy a few months ago when he was on holiday. So if you note any tone of annoyance from me, it's just because he was having a lovely time and I was stuck in an office. And here's an excerpt of my chat with Ian Fulcher.
I remember years ago watching a film, and I remember, because I'm so obsessed with my history and particular points in English, actually English and Russian history, and watching this film set in 1600s. And I remember, I don't know, I think I was early 20s, watching it and coming out being so angry because some of the characters were wearing, well, she was wearing a medieval wimple and she was wearing some 17th century blah, 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 kind of really being really high on my horse about it. And I think now designing and knowing about creative license and knowing that actually it's not necessarily, you can do a job and suddenly the director will like, I don't want anyone to have hats in this. Okay, well, and you can argue your point, but there's only so much you can argue when it's just black no. With design, that's, I think, there's layers behind the scenes that you don't necessarily know about as a viewer.